Greetings from Yashoda Hospital, Secunderabad. Dr. Rajiv Goyal, Dr. Pattabhiraman, Dr. Prashant Jachet, Dr. Ravindra Mehta, Dr. Balraju, Dr. Tinku, and my colleagues. I hope I'm audible, right?
Yes, very much.
You're audible.
So my case is on a bilateral mainstem obstruction, the case discussion on malignant central airway obstruction. So the title of this case, I have kept it as No Road Leads to Rome. She's a 54-year-old female, history of CA cervix squamous cell CA with metastasis. She received chemo and radiation therapy, currently on palliative chemo. Presentation was progressive shortness of breath to the oncologist. She had stridor at rest, and when she was lying down, her saturations were going below 50. And then they did a bronchoscopy and found there is a mainstem obstruction, and then referred to our center. She has come around 350 kilometers from my hospital. The request was for a therapeutic bronchoscopy under an ECMO support. So I have a CT image here. You can see both the airways are patent, but at the carinal level, you can see the obstruction there. So we did a rigid bronchoscopic assessment. So once we go in there, you see both the stems of the right main and left main bronchus are completely occluded with the tumor. So you see, in the down video, so there is no path how this patient is breathing. Then the anesthetist said like there is no road to go, then you have to stop the procedure because he finds it difficult. This case happened when I was doing a tracheal TB stenosis repair. This patient had a code blue call in the department, and then we had to rush her inside the OT. I used an electrosurgical snare, electrocautery device, and then I was able to open, after 3 hours, I was slowly able to open the left main bronchus. And then I deployed a 12 into 30 bonus stent in the left main bronchus. As you can see, I'm deploying the stent there. And then I was able to pass beyond the obstruction. The stent got expanded well after 10-15 minutes. And then I had placed it just above the carinal level. So I did a check bronchoscopy after 3 days. And the local, you see a well deployed stent in the left main bronchus. I was able to pass my 4-month course beyond the stenosis. In the left main stem, I was able to open it. So then I referred back to the treating oncologist. She went back walking. Roommate saturation was 98% on roommate. And then she received 2 cycles of cytotoxic chemotherapy, comes for a surveillance bronchoscopy after 3 months. You can see I did not operate on the right main stem, but the right main stem is completely opened up after the chemotherapy sessions. And then the left main started to have stent-related complications, though the airway patency was maintained. There's a small mucosal tag related to the stent-related complication. So this is my case, and then she had lived almost for 6 months after the procedure, and then she expired. So coming to this case, what were the important points here is like, I could have done both the limbs, but it took almost 3 to 4 hours for me to open up the left main bronchus. So should I have done both the limbs at the same time? That is one question, because I had a code blue call and no emergency things, means the decision was taken on table. Current questions are like, should I exchange the straight stent to the wide stent now, or continue the oncology treatment considering the extensive spread? Thank you.
Okay, so that's an unusual situation, and Hari, the case is nice. It's very interesting. The only thing we didn't like is all roads lead to Rome. We don't like the mention of Rome. Let's keep it out there, and let's say all roads lead to Hyderabad. On a serious note, now let's start discussion of the case. I thought we could talk of 2-3 case points in every case. One is the challenges faced in the case. Secondly, what else could you have done? Hari has raised that question. And the third is some learning points. So let us start with our Malaysian guest and my good friend Jamal. What are your challenges which you perceive in this case, and how has Hari handled them?
Thanks, Ravin. Ravin, I mean, I thought Harry did an extremely good job. Actually, I mean, to me, my first impression was that the tumor was, the malignancy was really extensive. Actually, So, and the patient expired up within 6 months. Did she? Yeah. So I'm not quite sure, what else could have been done, or whether things could have been done better, considering that it was a very advanced malignancy. I thought, you did well there, So I have no further comment, Ravin. I've talked long enough, more than 30 minutes, so maybe I would like to hear from expert from India.
Yeah. So Prashant, Hari mentioned the fact that this case was transferred to him for ECMO, but he seems to have done the whole case without ECMO. And he mentioned the inordinately a large amount of time it took because of the complexity. Your comments and thoughts on that?
Well, I think Hari did a brilliant a brilliant job. I think what we need to learn from this case is that whatever you do is what you decide at that point. What is appropriate. And I think one would say, okay, both those main stem bronchi are blocked. Let's remove let's debulk both of them. Let's put in a Y stent plus an additional stent down there if required to support it. All those things could have been done. Theoretically sound good. But I think if already 3 to 4 hours of anesthesia is done, one limb is open, and I think at that point, the decision was, I think we need to respect that decision, which was taken at that point to say, okay, this is enough, because all of us need, an intervention. You can't keep on going. At some point you have to say, okay, this is as good as it gets now and today. And I think you take a practical decision there. So I think, Hari, you did a brilliant job there. You said, okay, I've opened up one main stem bronchus. I think I put in a stent there, and patient obviously you thought was being ventilated well. And I think, I personally think it was a good job. Suppose you would have done it. Suppose you would have done this very easily in the next half an hour. I'm sure you would have gone in and done the second, limb as well. So I think everything really depends on how the case is evolving, and how things are evolving as you do the case.
ECMO, Prashant, the question on ECMO, since he was transferred, Hari did this whole thing on with ventilation. What about the application of ECMO?
I think again, I think I've not used ECMO so much as far as such interventions and debulking are concerned. But I think the point for I think again that's a very clinical decision. If you think you could, just having both the bronchi obstructed, and you could still, your anesthetist, I think this is where the good anesthetist team comes to the rescue. You need to have a good dedicated anesthetist team who says, okay, I can ventilate this patient, and you would say, okay, and let the pulmonologist do the job. If the patient was not being ventilated adequately, or there were problems, I think you would have needed to, shift to a better way of maintaining the hemodynamics and do the procedure. So I think that's my take on it. I think Hari did very well to avoid the ECMO. And of course, this would not have been possible without excellent anesthetic support.
Pattabi, let's talk of something which is very core. There is a learning curve for everything. Hari has shown a case where he's already in the midst of doing some difficult situation. And on top of that, this comes into the picture. You have a look at it. Now you go with the retrospectoscope. She has lived so much and so forth and so on. Your learning curve, your experience, amount of time it's going to take. And in India, you have to throw in a component of how are you going to face this family, the discussions. And if you were in COVID times, you'll be doing a COVID, wondering about the COVID status. And the fact is, what are going to be your outcomes in the long term and the economics of it all? Tell us what it takes to do such a thing. Would you say that a novice person should do it? Who should be the one taking it up? And how do you factor all these decision-making points?
Okay. First up, congratulations, Hari. That was a wonderful job done. But let's look at it this way. Now, this is a patient who's had malignancy, who's had a chemotherapy, who's got a radiotherapy, who's been coded now. Now, when a patient with a code with that kind of a CT, probably I've not looked at the CT, and with this kind of a thing, our initial impulse would be do not do anything. Just leave or go, because this patient has had your thing. Now, there are different situations where you have to get in. That need not necessarily be medical. There can be social reasons and so on. But upfront, if someone is a beginner, I wouldn't really want any beginner to go anywhere near this case at this particular point. Hari is a seasoned interventionalist, and he went ahead. But I don't think this is for everyone to start off. I think this is something, because ultimately, once you put the scope inside, then you'll have to do something, because you can't get out of that place. With that kind of thing, with an anesthesia, even a small orifice that the patient has been living, once the anesthesia and the relaxants go in, the patient is going to choke and you're not going to come back again. And this is going to be a procedure after which the patient is not going to wake up. So I think the first step is this has to be only in a tertiary and only in a very skillful area. And even that, I would really be very, 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 wary about, dropping my scope in such a situation. You look at a very, very small amount of area to work with. So that is, as far as Ravi's thing goes, whether will you do it, I will be very hesitant to even start it with this kind when the patient is code. I mean, if the patient is having a code blue and you go in, I mean, that's going to be, the outcome is not going to be that good at that point. So that's very, very, a frightening thing. And but a good job done, I think, with all these things that we see. We as interventionalists, we love to see this. A patient was almost dying, has the 6 months of good lease of life. Second thing, if I may continue, is about whether you'll do only the stent or not. I think Prashant has clearly answered. Lesser the better, especially the patient has had a radiotherapy on. The patient who has had a radiation of very, very poor mucosa, and we can literally tear them. It almost sometimes go like paper, and you try doing something and you'll end up, having a mucosa which cannot be repaired. And we've also had cases where you put a stent and it just tears and the distal end opens and so on. So we'll have to be very wary about the fact that, we're working on a radiotherapy thing. So do less. And that's what I think he's done. Just the thing you have to do. This is a firefighting, and you fought it and you just come out, and it's very good. And the follow bronchoscopy you showed, it's a beautiful opening of both the things. In fact, I would have even tried to remove that stent in the left side, because it at that point was quite okay, and there are stent related complications, but that can be discussed. So these are the things that come to my thing at this point. Anything, Ravi, I think I'll need your opinion as well. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not supposed to talk. Wish
Okay.
Ravi, can I say something?
Okay, so I think what you made is a point which Arve talked about in his lecture, that basically there is an endoscopic outcome and there is a ultimate outcome to the patient, which is a functional outcome. And we saw the discrepancy he showed, which is widely demonstrated, illustrated in this case. However, this patient had a combined good outcome. So Rajiv, let me ask you the final question on this. That, Hari has taken this up, one case going on, second case he takes up of the highest order possible, indicative of his fiery spirit, and of course his supple and wide open coronaries like the stent he put in. My question to you, you're the master of doing Y stents flexibly, which I've heard a lot from you. How would you have handled this anyway differently? Is there anything else for us to learn if we are not capable of putting, rigid scopes and doing all these things? Will we let the patient go, or should we use?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
So I think in this kind of a situation, doing just with a flexible, trying to put a Y stent with a flexible is out of the question. So because you need to have an airway. However, I would like to comment that, under the circumstances when you have both sides blocked, almost completely blocked, like in this patient, I may have tried to, open with I normally use a cautery. Dr. Jamal, we don't use laser so much in India. So I may have used a cautery to initially open both sides and get some airway. And the only problem with a Y stent in this particular situation is that the carina is very, very broad. So you may end up, not being able to place the Y stent optimally, because the carina is so broad, it would splay the Y stent, much wider than the angle which it permits. So I would first like to, reduce the carina on both sides by doing some cautery. And then if I felt that a stent is required, because sometimes when you open the carina from both sides, you may actually not really require a stent, because if you are able to cauterize it and bring it down on both sides, you may end up in a situation where you're getting good airway. You may not actually require a stent. So I think it's a question of what you decide at that particular time. It would also depend on the amount of bleeding that you encounter when you're trying to do the cautery, and trying to see how friable the tissue is. So all those factors would count. But the first thought when I looked at Hari's case was that yes, possibly think about a Y-stent, but first open both sides with cautery and try to open the airway on both sides. First, once you have the airway open and you're able to put a thin scope and see how distally you can go and what is the patency of the distal lung, then decide about whether you want to go for a Y-stent or a single stent, which was very successfully done in this case.
Excellent. So
Ravi, one comment. It's interesting to see. Yeah, it's interesting to see. That after 2 cytotoxic chemotherapies, the left side, the right side also opened up. So I think that's what it is. This patient probably had received chemotherapy, radiotherapy, everything was resistant, and despite that, you see after on a follow-up bronch, the right side has opened up. So I think there's no right decision, no wrong decision. I think what you do at that point, you feel appropriate, is absolutely fine. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look at it retrospectively again, of course, if you had just opened the airway on both sides, maybe to about 40-50%, just with some kind of hot therapy, you may not require the stent at all, because you might find that after 2 months of chemo, the tumor has completely regressed. So it's sometimes these things are not very predictable, and it's very difficult to judge in a patient with a failure of chemo and radiation how the patient is going to behave subsequently. So it's a question of what decision you take and what are the stents that you have at your disposal. Sometimes you may not have the right size stent in your inventory at that point of time, which you want to use straight away. So it's many factors are there, and like Patabi said, you do it only when you have some kind of skill and assistance of that kind to attempt that. So under the circumstances, I think the patient did very well, and Hari did very well to take the patient through and give her 6 months more of life, which is really very commendable.
And if I can add about the ECMO part, I think ECMO and the therapeutic, especially hot thing, coring and thing with all that heparin going on, it's going to be a huge challenge. ECMO in this situation with that kind of a 3-hour procedure with a lot of electrocautery, coring and thing, and it starts bleeding, and you do not know what to do because the patient will having stiff dose of heparin going. I mean, it's difficult actually.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to put some closure points into this, a very, very interesting case Hari has brought out, which is the pinnacle of intervention, and that too coming at a situation in the worst possible situation. So there is a tough case, and there's a tough case which comes at the right end part of the clinical spectrum. So this one comes at the worst situation that a case can be. The interesting part is that paradoxically in the past, this used to be don't do anything about these guys, but that paper from Ost and all showed that basically the people in the worst functional status probably have the maximum benefit. It is a paradox which is portrayed very nicely in this particular case. Whether to do or not to do addressed, of course, that is the one issue which we've talked about. What is to be done? Again, talked about use of ECMO plus minus, but Patabi, to add to, there's a lot of people using regional anticoagulation first to facilitate even hot therapy. Then, of course, whether it's only debulking and leaving it alone, debulking and stenting. Obviously, when patients come crashing, then the idea of putting a more permanent strategy makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, the good response to later therapy, which clearly increases the longevity of this patient beyond any possible statistic at that point. So I think these are the take-home points and the learning points. Hari, again, we commend you, and it's an excellent case.
Thank you, sir. I think we had excellent talks today by Dr. Harvi Dattao and Dr. Jamalul, and also one interesting and challenging case by Hari. So my talk was on benign tracheal stenosis. I hope I'm audible, sir.
Yeah.
Just trying to share my screen. So I'll be presenting a case of a benign complete tracheal stenosis. couple of slides. We have a lot of causes for tracheal stenosis, but in our setup, the common causes which we see, I think the first thing, if you want to talk about tracheal stenosis, the most common cause we see is the PITS. That is a post-intubation followed by post-tracheostomy trauma, and then comes the TB. TB more often causes bronchial and bronchotracheal stenosis. But if we talk about isolated tracheal stenosis, PITS is the commonest thing which we see in our part of the world. And the case I'll be showing is a complete tracheal stenosis. So how do you define a complete tracheal stenosis? We have this classification here, grade 4, where we have no detectable lumen is a complete tracheal stenosis. So this is just one of the things which we look at when we try to decide what has to be done. As Dr. Jamalul has said, there are so many other things which we have to figure in when we have to decide the choice of therapy, including the site of stenosis, the length, the number, the comorbidities, and in India also the socioeconomic factors. So this case actually was a 30-year-old lady who actually consumed organophosphorus compound with a suicidal intent. Unluckily, she developed intermediate syndrome, for which she had to be on ventilator for almost 3 to 4 weeks. And as a part of this process, she was tracheostomized. She was finally weaned off ventilator, given physio, and she was sent home. But sadly, they tried decannulation multiple times but couldn't do. So that was when she had come to us. So when we had first seen her, she was the vitals were stable. The neurological function was recovering, though she needed still some support to stand and walk. But she was very depressed because she was not able to talk. So this is the X-ray neck, which is projected here. As you can see, the tracheostomy tube is there. And above the tracheostomy, we see a complete abrupt cutoff of the trachea. So this was the bronchoscopy view, where we can see that above, this is through the vocal cords, and you can see that there's a complete cutoff of trachea. You can't even see any pinhole opening of the trachea. The same thing, I'll just play a small video of it. So again, the same thing here, you can see the at around 2 to 3 centimeters from the vocal cords, what you can see is a complete abrupt cutoff of trachea with no pinhole opening. So at this point, we discussed with the patient what had to be done. We offered surgical resection as one of the treatment options, because if it is successful, then it will be a lifetime cure for the patient. But then this was refused by the family on 2 grounds. First was that she had already spent 1.5 months in the hospital and they didn't want any more surgeries to be done on the person, and also for financial reasons. Then we had 2 options, either to leave her on tracheostomy like that, or then to try a bronchoscopic approach, try to dilate and then see if we can proceed. So because she was already depressed with suicidal intentions and she was very upset that she was not able to talk, we tried to go through the bronchoscopic approach. So this was how we started. The first thing was to see whether we can, if at all, try to create a tract. So this was what we had done. First, this is electrocautery knife to give the incision at the central part, where you can see a small white zone. So this is, I think, one of the trickiest part when we have to try to open a complete cutoff, because we have to be careful not to create an artificial lumen. So we just made a small incision. We saw we were still not through. Then again tried to go in a bit deeper. Normally we get a giveaway once that stenosis is completely punctured. So there it is. So after this thing, we would like to see the tracheostomy through the opening here. So we were sure that we were in the correct path. Then the second thing, even though we were sure, the second thing normally what we do in such a case is to reconfirm. So a guide wire is being passed through the rigid bronchoscope. Had this been in the bronchus, we can also use a fluoro to see where we are, but because we are a tracheostomy, the easier way was to see the guide wire now, which is through the bronchoscope passed to the tracheostomy. So now we have a guide wire passed across the stenosis from the vocal cord into the distal part of the trachea. Now that we have created the path, the next thing is to dilate the trachea. So this is something which is commonly done. Serial CRE balloon dilatation starting from 6 mm. We can just go on. This is just a video of the balloon dilatation being done, and once the balloon is adequately dilated, then you pass the rigid bronchoscope across the stenotic segment into the distal trachea. Once this is done, we can be rest assured that we have created a significant lumen. The last thing is to deploy a stent. In this particular patient, we decided to deploy the stent in the first instant itself. So this is a silicone stent which was deployed. It is being positioned. And once it is properly placed, you have to open the stent with either a balloon or using the forceps to open it out. So this is a stent now which is deployed across the stenotic segment. Now this I think will be the first part of the story, because the second part is follow-up. So once we place a silicone stent for benign tracheal stenosis, it is a long story which will just begin. So this is a follow-up bronchoscopy which was done around 4 months after the stent was placed. Lucky we were in this case because there was no stent migration and no much granulation in this case. So this is just one case example of a patient who had a complete tracheal stenosis where surgery was refused by the family, and we had to do a bronchoscopic approach and placed a tracheal benign silicone stent. So this is the pre-X-ray where X-ray is showing a complete cutoff, and this is the X-ray following the stent placement where we can see the lumen nicely in the lateral view. So similar experience, we have around 4 to 5 cases in the last 2 years. Most of them prolonged ventilator, post-tracheostomy, upper third of the trachea which is involved. Surgical option is given to all of these patients. 2 of them refused and bronchoscopic dilatation was done. One patient underwent surgical resection, but he had a restenosis and we had to place a Montgomery T-tube. The 4th person is due for surgical repair post-COVID season. So this is again some images of the first one was the case which I had shown. Second is another girl with TB meningitis where she had a complete cutoff. Again, we had to place do a bronchoscopic dilation, place a stent. The third is the guy who underwent surgical repair, had a restenosis, and again we had to place a Montgomery T-tube. So these are some cases of extreme benign tracheal stenosis where you don't see a lumen at all. But the more common variety is the one where you have some lumen to go inside, where our job becomes much easier. So to sum up, surgery definitely remains the cornerstone of management. But then in our setup, I think bronchoscopic approach also has some role, especially when it recurs after surgery, or the surgery is either unacceptable to the patient or surgery is technically not feasible. I think with this, I will end my case.
Okay, very interesting. So let's start with the usual questions. First of all, very interesting and again out of the box case Nagarjun, which brings up some interesting points to discuss. We start with the first 2 usual questions, the challenges and alternative techniques, which is non-surgery here. This time we start with Pattabhi.
Sir, please unmute the mic.
Yeah, lovely job, Nagarjun. This, I mean, all the cases that you showed was picture perfect actually. And yeah, we used to get these kind of cases time to time. The thing is, if it's too close to occult cord, I think that's where you have the challenge. The advantage is when a patient is on a tracheostomy, you can take your time, do a proper thing because the ventilation goes from somewhere else, so you can actually do a job properly. Usually you have a pucker, and from there, that would be a giveaway so that you can concentrate on that and then start dilating so that you don't really injure or go for a form of false tract and all that. So all this has been, the principles have been very clearly shown. What are the alternate ways are, I mean, since it's too close, I mean, the easier way, since there is already a tracheostomy, is one thing is you dilate it and put in a Montgomery. So that will be a safer option for a few reasons. One is to do all this in one go. And if you're not too sure about the vocal cords and how it is, because the patients are on tracheostomy for quite a while, and suddenly they'll have to start, I mean, this is decannulation happening all at once with the stent inside. And if there is a problem, you might have to intubate and all that. For that, a stent inside might be an issue. So those are theoretical issues, and hence to see whether it's okay, Montgomery is usually a very good idea because you always have a T and a thing inside. And third thing is what Ravi has actually described, and it's a very fascinating thing. You have a dilatation, you put in a stent on the top of a tracheostomy and have a Shailis and a tracheostomy with a stent, which actually is a Desi Montgomery, which has all these things put together. So all these 3 things are actually possible if the patient doesn't want a surgery. And this will be a useful bridge for a surgery also if the patient wants a surgery eventually. Having some tracks for some time and then see if the patient doesn't get well after removal, you can always subject the patient to surgery. I'm not too sure if I missed a lot, but anyway, a lot of great people around to fill up what I
Yeah. So interesting, Pattabi. I think you've added very nicely to the discussion. Jamal, your thoughts on this? Jamal, unmute yourself, please.
Unmute yourself now.
Right. Okay. There was an extreme case of tracheal stenosis. I mean, honestly, I've never, done such a case before, actually, So that was a great job, actually, And, so it just shows that bronchoscopic approach is an acceptable method to manage post-intubation tracheal stenosis, actually, So although it's always stated that surgery remains standard, but there are very few centers in the world that have experience in tracheal resection. So I think bronchoscopic approach will remain because there are always people who are not suitable for surgery. And then I think that was a fantastic case, actually. And I mean, I'm not sure whether I was brave, confident enough to go through that, that wall, with hardly any opening at all, So I just want to know, I mean, were you guided by anything at all, when you puncture that piece of membrane, to make sure that you didn't create a false lumen, actually, So were you guided by anything, any imaging or anything at all?
I think Dr. Pattabi has said normally you see a small pucker. The central part of the trachea usually is little more wider than the remaining part. So I think that is a place where we start making the puncture. Or if the trachea is concentric, circular, then you choose the central part to make a first incision. I think that is how we do. There's no other way, I think, which we can help us. I think second thing is to have an idea of the length of the stenosis before we start doing it. If it is too long, I think it becomes a bit riskier. So all the three cases where we had done were around 1 to 1.5 centimeters only. So it was not very long stenosis also.
You never had any complications in any of these cases?
So to be very frank, I think in the last 3 years, we had 5 cases of complete cutoffs. In 3, we could successfully create a tract. In 1, I think it was more than 2 centimeters. So we couldn't actually create a tract. So that was it. And the 5th case, we sent for surgery. We just hoping that the surgery is done properly.
Yeah, so I think Ravi, if I can make a quick comment.
Absolutely, Prashant. I was waiting for you to get off the phone.
So I think I think that's a very interesting case, and I think all of us come across these cases from time to time. I think, like Patta mentioned, that you can have the puckering, and that's the point of entry. I wanted to respond to Jamal saying that you really need to have a very good CT scan to know what is the exact length of the stenosis that you're working on. Now, the only one thing is that Nagarjuna used the knife to make the hole bigger and bigger. What I would typically do is I just want to have a hole enough so that a guide wire can go and a balloon catheter can go. That's all. So I limit the use of cautery and the balloon and the knife as much as possible. But again, I say there's no right thing, there's no wrong thing. You're guided by the situation then. But the principle would be, as soon as your guide wire is going in and you think your balloon catheter can go up, you can do it. And typically you can also use the if you have the fluoroscopy and the dye in the balloon, just to see, how the balloon is opening up, what pattern it is the balloon all across the stenosis or not. So I think these are some of the additional points which one can use. But again, you are always guided by what is the most appropriate thing on the site when you're doing the case.
Lovely. Rajiv, the voice of experience.
Yeah, so I think that, the tracheal part, the tracheal complete stenosis is sort of more amenable. But if you get into a situation where you have a main bronchostenosis like this, especially we've seen quite a few cases of left main complete stenosis. That is where the chances of creating a false passage or, injuring a nearby vessel becomes much more. And, although Nagarjun did mention using a fluoroscopy, but many times the collapsed lung around it, it doesn't allow you a very good image. So we recently had a patient of Wegener's granulomatosis, giving rise to complete obliteration of the left main bronchus. And although we used imaging and everything, and we tried in a similar fashion to create a passage, but we were unable. So it's a question of how much your imaging can guide you in terms of the length of the obliteration that is there. And I imagine that in that patient with Wegener's, the whole of the left main bronchus had kind of completely become adherent, and because of loss of cartilage, had become completely sort of fused. So we were not able to create a passage. Any experiences, Dr. Jamal? Any experience about? You mentioned these young females, with coming with complete obstruction. So we have seen several of these young girls, 18 to 23 years of age, coming with complete obliteration of the left main bronchus. And have you been able to, kind of dilate any of those patients? I mean, sometimes you put a pinhole, it becomes easier. But if there is complete obliteration, we have not really been able to be very successful in those
patients. I mean, frankly speaking, I've seen only 1 or 2 cases of post-TB stenosis where there was a complete obliteration of the lumen, and I have never attempted, any dilatation. So.
Yeah, because they want to get an autopneumonectomy kind of.
Actually, we're taking a risk. Actually, we try to, puncture the that's thin membrane actually, unless we are absolutely sure actually. So I've never done myself actually.
Yeah,
and Ravi, you are the moderator, but you might pull in. Say something about this.
Okay, so some closure points on this. Thank you for the comments. In the interest of time, I'll make some closure comments. Nagarjun, first lovely case to bring up.
Ravi, can I interrupt for a second before we close it? I think I'll keep it short. I think the important thing here is that all of these main bronchi stenosis are very challenging and they're benign. Often the lung dystally is often non-functional. So I think that also adds a very important. You need really a good reason to attempt the bronchial stenosis opening in a benign condition. You don't know how long it has been closed for. And I think I agree with Rajiv and others. It's extremely difficult to open up the bronchi and, compared to the trachea, because you know that after opening the trachea, you can ventilate and you can achieve something. But if the distal lung is completely gone and for a long time, then I think it might not be worth the risk.
Okay, so lovely points by the panelists after this provocative case. So Nagarjun, thank you for bringing up this case. But since we have to always talk of some learning points and point counterpoint, which is the whole theme of the experience today, few things out there. One, the patient was, you said, didn't want surgery. But understand when you take this up, the chance of false tract is there. So you're potentially looking at another surgery if something happens. So that's something which you do. And this is the classical phenomena of winging or walking the tightrope and intervention. Be as it may, your success speaks for itself. Secondly, we have also found that sometimes when Pattabhi mentioned what conduit will you use? So you have recanalization, you have conduit. Recanalization has all the challenges has been talked about. The conduit can either be as the stent you put in, which is like a large stent. And I was wondering whether a little smaller could have been okay, but it's a choice you make at the bedside. The second is a T-tube, which is a safety paradigm. And third is what we have described, that you take the tracheostomy and put a small stent on the top, and that was published as an innovation in laryngoscope. The issue to do some of these things is because the T-tube and or the other innovation will actually give you more insurance. Because if the stent again granulates above and below a 6 centimeter stent, again you're looking at more procedures. Secondly, the healing of the tracheostomy after a stent has been an issue we've had to deal with sometimes. Long-standing tracheostomies, you put a stent and that large hole to heal, but because it actually granulates on the base and the base has actually got a foreign body there, is a challenge you have to face, but something to think about when you look at all these things. And the final point is that ultimately these are out of the box things. The access is the main thing you guys talked about. So trachea, larger lumen, puckering a venture is a very good point. If you don't have puckering, again, you're winging it or walking the tightrope, and that is the main challenge. You use the cautery knife, you also use the ball tip, and very gingerly you go through, praying as you're doing that. And at the same time, you quickly try to see that you're constantly in the lumen. So again, a challenge. So novices should not attempt it unless a high degree of confidence is there. In terms of bronchial closure, as Rajiv talked about, very, very difficult, because usually if they're eccentrically closed because of a vasculitic process or tuberculosis, that is winging of the highest order. All your conduits are angling. So unlike the tracheal opening, it's very difficult to open. And confessionally, the first one we tried many years ago wound up becoming a dehiscence. And that was the genesis of innovation number 2, when we had to block it up with the blocker we have described and to save that bronchus over there. So again, in the airways, it's challenging. What has been done in literature is that the end-stent people, the Korean guys have described TB bronchostenosis of a complete nature, where they've opened it in the bronchus, but it's extremely difficult to replicate and quite challenging to take on. So these are most of the points around this interesting case which Nagarjun has described. Thank you so much, Nagarjun.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, a wonderful job, Vishwesh, to pull on good international faculty and the eminent national faculty. Respects to all. So I'm going to present a foreign body of at the subglottis. So this is a story of a 4-year-old girl presented with the history of aspiration of a whistle, followed by a stridor. So she presented to the ER at around midnight, 1 o'clock. So 8 hours after the presentation, the baby was conscious. She was having a stridor with whistling sound at rest. So this is the, I hope it is audible.
Very much.
So 8 hours after the aspiration, the baby was completely conscious, normal, no breathlessness, only a stridor with whistling sound at rest. But what happens, just in 30 minutes of time, she has a rapid deterioration. During the counseling part, to explaining the patients what has happened, in 30 minutes of time, there was rapid deterioration. In such a way, so when she was on room air, it was 98, and suddenly the saturation was 80% on 15 liters of oxygen with severe tachypnea, and she went into altered sensorium with a PCO2 of 60. Yes, she had more stridor, so anesthetist was there in the ER. So we are explaining the family what has to be done, because there's a case of a subglottic foreign body. So this was an X-ray which was done when the baby was absolutely normal. So in the lateral X-ray, you can see the visual at the subglottis. See, what we have done was, because the baby was crashing, so we have to take the baby with an emergency to a rigid bronchoscopy under general anesthesia with a jet ventilation. So there were many challenges, because it was a crash situation. The baby we are losing the airway. So what we have to do is to first maintain the patency of the airway to control the ventilation. So remember, it is a subglottic foreign body and it is completely obstructing the ventilation. The first thing what was done was to push the foreign body deep inside the trachea, not to try to remove it. So basically it was done because to maintain the airway patency and to control the ventilation. So once we have controlled the ventilation, now we have tried to remove the foreign body in the subglottis. As you can see, the optical forceps, we are trying to hold the vessel. So initially we hold the whole part, and later we try to hold the one edge of the vessel and try to remove it. So we have done a multiple attempts try to removing the vessel through the subglottis, but most of the attempts have been failed. The reason being, so at the time, during extraction through the subglottis, there was a tight edema. So we did a multiple attempts. You can see so much of puckering of the vessel, which was absolutely normal before. So invariably, we could not remove the vessel through the subglottis. So the reason was the severe edema of the subglottis. So after multiple attempts, what has happened was the disaster. So the optical forceps jaw has broken inside the airway. So you can see, so that's the optical forceps. Now the right optical forceps jaw has been broken inside, because obviously I was trying to compress the foreign body and to try to secure the foreign body inside the rigid bronchoscope to try to remove it in toto. But unluckily, the right jaw of the rigid optical forceps has been broken. So now you have another foreign body inside the airway. So that's the jaw of the right optical forceps. So luckily I had a second standby optical forceps. I used another optical forceps to remove the broken jaw initially. So that's the broken jaw, you can see. So we have removed the broken jaw with no problem, because it's very small. So now after multiple attempts, the problem is you are not able to retrieve the foreign body through the subglottis. So we have tried, as I've told you, we have tried many attempts to do a screwing movement at the subglottis and try to extract the foreign body inside the rigid bronchoscope, but it failed. So what else can be done? So what are the other options we have? Yes, we can use a balloon to extract through the subglottis, but unfortunately it is not so easy because the power required to extract over the subglottis is much superior for a rigid forceps than compared to the balloon or a basket. Probably basket also would have failed. I have not used balloon and basket, but that was the logical explanation I had in my mind. So now why is the reason you are not able to remove the foreign body through the The reason was the subglottic edema. So this was basically because of impacted vessel inside the subglottis and also because of multiple attempts through the rigid bronchoscope. So what next? What can be done? So obviously the first option is to do a tracheostomy or to leave the child there. So during the procedure, we have called the ENT for backup, and because it was late, very midnight, it was almost around 2:30 in early hours. So we could not get an ENT backup. So this is what we have decided. So yes, the baby is not going to die because we kept the foreign body inside the right main bronchus. Obviously, we can ventilate the left main stem bronchus. The baby is not going to die now. So now the option of doing a tracheostomy or to do something else. So we have gone ahead to do dilatation of the subglottis with increasing bronchoscopic diameter. So in the pediatric, this is what I use, the Karlstad set. We have the 3.5 size, that's an outer diameter of 5.7. This is the bronchoscope I have used for this case, the 4-year-old child. So what we have done was to dilate with serial bronchoscope of increasing diameter. The next scope was size 4, that's outer diameter of 6.7. And the next scope size 5, outer diameter of 7.8. So we've dilated to 7.8 mm. That's where we thought it's easy for us to remove the foreign body. So obviously I don't know the diameter of the vessel. So this was the last attempt I had to try to remove it. So as you can see, initially I'm dilating with the second scope. That's the size 4 rigid bronchoscope. So you can see initially I'm at the subglottis. I'll just go forward. So I've dilated with the size 4. So you can see the foreign body in the right main bronchus. So after I dilated with size 4, so then I started dilating with the size 5 rigid bronchoscope. That's the outer diameter of around 7 mm. So I had initially a bit difficulty in dilating with size 5 because the edema was there. So once I could able to pass over the subglottis, it was very easy. So the next option was to, again, the same thing, catch all the foreign body with an optical forceps and try to remove it. This was the last choice I had. It was almost 1.5 hours at the procedure. So luckily this time, after dilatation of the subglottis, I could able to remove the foreign body. So that was the foreign body, a vessel. This is what it is. So these are the important points in this case. The first thing is impacted subglottic foreign bodies are very dangerous, even when the symptoms are subtle. So they can worsen in no time. So in cases of subglottic edema, when foreign body can't be extracted, serial dilatation of subglottis can be tried before tracheostomy. Yes, if the option of tracheostomy is there, probably we can do it. So always have a spare instrument in hand. So luckily I was lucky because I had a spare instrument in this case. Otherwise I wouldn't have done the case, and there was an extra foreign body inside the airway. Thanks a lot.
Okay, interesting. Lovely case, Bala. And I think it sets the stage for, I think we'll take 2 comments this time. We are fortunate with us to have Rajiv here. In case those of you who don't know, Rajiv, 2012 Journal of Bronchology, 226 cases, 1 decade-year experience, foreign bodies in children. Rajiv, I rest my case. The stage is all yours.
Yeah, so Ravi, very interesting case. I think the main thing is that if the foreign body is larger than the larger than the diameter of the scope, which is probably what it was with the least size of the scope that Bala used. that is where the problem was. And as soon as he was able to put in a scope which was slightly larger than the foreign body, and which you saw that in the end when he took it out, he could keep the scope there while bringing the edge of the foreign body into the scope. He was able to remove it quite successfully, and I think that is the key point here, because at the glottis, at the subglottis level, and even at the level of the cords, you find that these foreign bodies, because of the edema and because of the configuration of the foreign body, will tend to get stuck, because of the foreign body coming, being slightly larger than that place. And which is why, when he was trying to twist the foreign body, even by holding the edge, he couldn't take it out. So I think, Bala, the learning point which you have, discovered, and all of us have discovered it the hard way over a period of time, is that when you find that you've gone inside, you find a foreign body which is slightly larger than the scope that you're using, and you're finding that you're coming at the subglottic level and you are not being able to bring it out, is to probably just stop there and not try to, repeatedly try to pull it out, but to leave it inside and put in a larger scope, which will automatically kind of dilate that area, and then try to bring that foreign body within the scope, and then remove both of them together, which is probably what you did at the end. So I think it really brings out this very important point. And again, middle of the night, being able to do this with very little support speaks volumes for both your courage and your skills. And the other thing is that it also brings to light that you should have a complete set of instruments, because we have time and again found that the more number of accessories and instruments you have while doing these foreign body work, the better off you are, because you do not know in the next foreign body which particular accessory will come of use. So having the entire range, and most people who are doing foreign body work will over a period of time accumulate all these various accessories, which will come handy from time to time. Lovely case, very nice.
Very nice, Rajiv. I think you summarized most of the points in this case. Prashant has to leave. Prashant, can you give some final comments, and then you can go ahead.
No. I think Rajiv has actually summed up it in a very nice way. I think so. I have no additional comments for this case. Yeah. So thanks, guys. I think it's great to see all of you. It seems normal now. It seems good that we could all of us connect on such a platform. So yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone.
And good we are not talking about Corona and COVID.
Absolutely, Rajiv. I mean, this seems to be our normal. Okay.
I know.
For those of you who don't know, Prashant is the lead author on the IIB guideline on COVID bronchoscopy, which they're shortly releasing. So Prashant, you're as COVID as COVID gets.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Hi, Prashant.
Okay. Bala, one final question is that there's a zero tip basket is there, which has got a very firm grip. So here the struggle is that whether there is edema, can a firm grip instrument manage to slide past the edema in a step prior to dilatation? Is that an option?
I have not tried in this case, sir, because I was using a rigid instrument here. But I had used a zero tip basket that's from Boston, what you're saying. So yes, it is a nitinol basket. It doesn't have a tip. Obviously, the grip is good, but the problem is when you're extracting through a narrow orifice, most of the times the basket slips. It doesn't have very good force as compared to a rigid instrument. So that's what my take was. Yes, I am biased. I have not used the basket in this case. I've used it before and I also failed extracting through the stenotic area.
Sorry for interrupting, but I think basket is not the ideal way for this case. A basket would, you might actually end up with a broken basket also inside. So, in a situation like this, probably the way he managed it is probably the best way.
Excellent. So I think we thank you, Bala, for bringing up this interesting case among the trio of lovely cases we have done.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. So my case is, can you hear me, sir?
Very well.
So my case is one pill can kill. So this is the case which I had 2 days after I joined Yashoda. He was a 50-year-old male, non-smoker, non-alcoholic, with no comorbidities, presented with sudden onset persistent cough for 3 days, breathlessness for a day, swelling of the neck for a day, but there were no other symptoms. So on examination, we had a patient with a saturation of 92% on room air, pulse rate was 110, respiratory rate was 28 with use of accessory muscles, hemodynamically stable, but chest was suggestive of decreased breath intensity on the left side. And on the, as we can see from the picture, the neck was swollen and there was presence of palpable crepitations, and the patient had bilateral subconjunctival hemorrhage. So an X-ray was taken, and that was suggestive of a decreased lung volume on the left side, but there was an evidence of a pneumomediastinum and subcutaneous emphysema as well. So for evaluation, patient CT scan was done. As we can go through the mediastinal cut, there was a collapse and there was a calcified radio-opaque material was seen. So this was the radio-opaque material which was seen obstructing the left main bronchus with an associated collapse. And in the other sections also we can see the calcified lesion exactly causing the cutoff of the left main bronchus. So a parenchymal window was also suggestive of a collapse, along with there was a presence of a subcutaneous emphysema as well as a pneumomediastinum. So on probing, then the patient recollected that the cough started following an intake of, even though we are not very sure, probably a ranitidine or a loperamide pill 3 days back, following which the patient had a recurrent bouts of cough that persisted, though the severity had decreased. So then since we anticipated suspected a pill aspiration, we underwent, the patient underwent a rigid bronchoscopy. So this is a video that is showing the rigid bronchoscopic intubation. So we entered into the, we intubated the patient with a rigid bronchoscope, and followed by that through a flexible bronchoscope, we saw a presence of a white fluffy material almost occluding the entire lumen of the left main bronchus. So since it was we assumed it to be a calcified thing because it was a radio opaque. So we instilled a saline over this to make it a cryosensitive, because metals are generally not cryosensitive. So following that, we tried to create a lumen in the center of this mask, because we didn't want to hold it with a rigid bronchoscopy forceps, which will cause the disintegration of this entire pill. So following that, we tried to make a hole through the center with a sequential cryo extraction, as we can see from this picture. And following that, we tried to remove this entire pill away from the mucosal wall, so that to prevent the injury of the mucosa by the application of the cryo. Then we tried to extract all the pieces piecemeal. And after that, what we could see was there was an entire very thick granulation, and the flecks were totally adherent to the mucosa, and the mucosa was very fragile. So then we knew that if we leave the pill like that, it is going to further cause granulation and stenosis. So we tried to remove it by teasing out each material with the blunt end of the Fogarty balloon. Like we tried, it almost took 2.5 hours to 3 hours. We tried to remove the entire flex from the wall of the mucosa without damaging the mucosa. And following that, the remnant pieces were extracted with the help of the flexible forceps through a flexible bronchoscope. And we used a gauze soaked in the saline to take out all the remnants that were sticking onto the mucosal wall. Following that, this was the image we had at the end of the procedure. We were definitely able to recanalize the lumen, but the lumen was totally edematous and with a lot of flex remaining, and there were we anticipated probably the patient can land up in a bronchial stenosis. So we started the patient on empirical steroids, as well as we gave him adequate bronchial dilators to maintain a bronchial hygiene. So the procedure was a recanalization of the airway with a rigid bronchoscopy with a cryo extraction, along with a mechanical dislodgement with the Fogarty balloon tip and forceps. And this was the X-ray which was there post-operatively, where we were able to get the resolution, where we were able to expand the left lung. And luckily, 2 weeks post procedure after steroids, there was a very significant relief in the edema, and all that we could see was a flex of the pill that are remnant. But this time we didn't attempt to further remove this because there was an excellent recanalization and the patient was totally asymptomatic. So this is the post procedure 2 weeks later, where there is a complete resolution of the entire lung and there is no evidence of any pneumomediastinum or subcutaneous emphysema. So just to sum up, it was a case of an inorganic foreign body for which a cryo was used. So to make it cryosensitive, we instilled saline over it. And early bronchoscopic surveillance and intervention is especially indicated for this pill because they have a tendency to cause excessive inflammation and granulation and can lead to sequelae like stenosis. And most of the dissolved pills may remain underdiagnosed. And the multimodality approach using cryo and even mechanical dislodgement helped in this case. Thank you.
Very impressive, Vishweshwaran. So unfortunately, in a e-platform, you cannot clap. If you could clap, do that over here for, of course, you and all the lovely cases presented before earlier also. Jamal, your thoughts on what he has done, and also we would like to hear some comments on pill, swelling of pills, modalities, and your experience with pillology in the bronchus.
Right. I mean, I think 1 or 2 years ago, I had almost similar case. A female patient, aspirated a pill, and then we removed the pill, and a few months later, she developed right main bronchial stenosis, which we had to dilate. So I agree with Vishweshwaran that it is under-recognized, but I had a similar experience actually, and with regard to how he did the procedure, I think I couldn't have done it in a different way. I would have used cryo as well, to remove the pill actually, So what he did was great actually,
Excellent. So that's Jamal is trying to prototype the chill pill, Pattabi. Tell us more about what you would have seen. Modality is used. This is a young interventional pulmonologist coming back in his first week in the country, and he has shown a remarkably challenging case. Give us some more learning points and some take-home points on this.
Yeah, So, Phil, if you've listened to Dr. Atul Mehta speak about this, he's got a whole series on how pills are the most unrecognized things. The thing about the pills are the different things. One is the pH of the thing and the irritation. All the pills can cause a lot of irritation. So the mucosa is really bad, and you'll have to remove the last bit to get the airways back. And it's very challenging because you'll not know where the pill is, what the mucosal irritation is, and so on. Good job done actually, Vishwesh. You have to have multiple attempts. So rigid bronchoscopy is the ideal conduit for that. If you don't have rigid bronchoscopy, even a simple endotracheal tube is good enough. The thing is, in these cases, you'll have to go in and come back. So it's not a good idea to pass the vocal cords on and off. So the best thing is to take the patient in GA, take a conduit, preferably rigid. If you don't have a rigid, it's fine. You do a larger size of the endotracheal tube that goes in. And you'll have to do multiple things. It's usually piecemeal, and the ideal thing will be, as Vishwesh showed, a cryo thing. And that's the reason why you want a conduit to have a very safe procedure. And I'm not too sure if I'm missing anything. Ravi, you'll have to.
No, so excellent point. Ravi, in your 220 series, tell us more about the pills you saw and the pill lessons.
Yeah.
Rajiv, unmute, please.
Unmute.
Yeah, I was wondering whether some kind of a curved forceps, when you put the rigid there, and you've got that whole, kind of conglomerate pill there in front of you, would it have been also an option to put a curved forceps around it and just try to gently dislodge the whole thing en masse, and rather than trying to do it with the cryo and get it out piecemeal? Would anybody would have thought of trying that prior?
In fact, we put in cryo hoping that it come as a en masse.
Yeah,
it may not necessarily happen.
That was not happening.
Yeah, that was not happening.
So one may have thought of that.
Maybe like Prashant says, there's no right or wrong answers here.
When you have these very soft foreign bodies inside,
okay.
For example, soft peas and stuff like that, then these curved forceps, to try just get them around that and try to bring it out. I mean, that is something one could have thought of.
Well, it can be epitomized.
The clearance was well done eventually.
Yeah.
But I think the Patta's point is very valid, that you need a conduit, because you may have to just go in repeatedly and in and out, and even though you may be doing whatever you're doing with the fiber optic, but because you have to go in repeatedly, even an endotracheal tube, even if you don't have a rigid, would make a lot of sense.
So I think the interesting points is what you mentioned about the en masse removal of the pill is that the crumble leads to the jumble. And I think the fact is because it broke over there is where the whole problem came up. To summarize this interesting case with Vish brought up, is it basically prototypes one of the most difficult aspects of an organic foreign body that too which goes and gets lodged in a challenging location, the left main bronchus here, where the curves are much more. That too distally already has sequelae. So you're dealing with a complex foreign body. You're dealing with something not only which does its obstructive function, it also has interactive function with the mucosa and a chemical function. So it leads to more problems. It itself disintegrates, so cannot be taken out en masse, which is another problem. It causes distal sequelae, which is also a problem because of infection and the hypoxemia and what you have to deal with in procedure. And the fact is that when you have to take it out, it's a long procedure also because of the crumbling nature. Not to mention the fact that there may be sequelae later of mucosal damage, stenosis maybe, and which has been also talked about, and infection also, the small particles which are distal, which may continue the cycle of irritation. So many interesting aspects come out in this case, and certainly the management and the way it was handled is a significantly interesting way of how it was managed, with some options mentioned. Clearly very well.
Thank you, sir. Hi, everyone. Is it possible to see my slides?
Yeah. We are seeing your slides.
Sure. Okay. Very good evening, one and all. At the outset, let me thank Vishwesh and the entire Yashoda team for giving me an opportunity to speak a few words regarding benign airway obstruction. And in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'll be discussing an interesting case of benign etiology which has caused central airway obstruction. Greetings from God's own country, Kerala, and our institution, Amrita Hospital, Kochi. So before discussing my case, there are different causes for central airway obstruction. We have already discussed a range of malignant conditions. There are certain benign conditions also which can predispose to central airway obstruction, like benign airway tumors, certain forms of lymphadenopathy, vascular pathologies, cartilage disorders, various granulomatous conditions, pseudotumors, hyperdynamic conditions like tracheomalacia or bronchomalacia, various congenital abnormalities, and as well as there are certain other conditions which can predispose to benign airway obstruction or a benign central airway obstruction. So moving on to my case, this is a quite familiar case for most of the panelists. This is regarding a 61-year-old male patient who is already a diagnosed case of severe COPD, who apparently presented to my clinic with complaints of cough, shortness of breath. He had significant orthopnea as well as stridor. And he was already a diagnosed case of tracheobronchial rhinosporidiosis, who was apparently on treatment with Dapsone, and he was not getting significant response to Dapsone. And he was diagnosed almost like 3 to 4 years before, and he was on Dapsone. At that time, he was quite stable. He had progressive breathlessness, but there was no stridor. So when he visited my clinic, there was a stridor, and spirometry was done from another center which showed a significant drop in FEV1, and echo showed severe pulmonary hypertension. So this was his chest X-ray. Chest X-ray seems to be quite okay, apart from hyperinflated lung fields and low flat diaphragm and all those things. Apart from that, though, there is no significant pathology detected on chest X-ray. And this was a CT image. The CT image, as you can see, there are multiple polypoidal lesions involving the central airway. I proceeded with the bronchoscopy, and the bronchoscopy showed multiple, the classical strawberry kind of lesions involving the central airway. I mean, this is the tracheal lumen, and this is the carina, and the lesion is almost occluding completely the left main bronchus. So there were multiple lesions which are extremely vascular lesions involving the central airway as well as the tracheal lumen as well as the left main bronchus. So these are the typical rhinosporidiosis lesions, which are often difficult to treat condition, and there is no definitive medical management for this condition, and unfortunately, most of these patients will have to undergo different forms of surgical modality, like resection is the only option. So what next? I mean, this patient is a case of severe COPD, is having severe pulmonary hypertension, bad FEV1, stridor. So initially I inserted the rigid bronchoscope, and the rigid bronchoscope was placed in the subglottic area because the lesions were extending almost from the proximal part of trachea. But unfortunately, we found it quite difficult to ventilate this patient. For the reason is that there was significant amount of air leak through the rigid, and the anesthetist was not at all comfortable with doing a rigid bronchoscopy guided debulking of these lesions. So what next? So we had a discussion on table regarding what are the other options. We have to take out these lesions, otherwise, the patient will be in serious trouble. So rigid bronchoscopy was out of question. I had to remove the rigid barrel, and I had to offer something else. So there came in mind, the anesthetist told us an option of an extra long endotracheal tube, often called as a microlaryngeal tube, which has been often used by the head and neck surgeons or the ENT surgeons. So this is the extra long microlaryngeal tube, often called as the MLT or an MLS tube. And there is another variant of this tube, which is called as the laser protected MLS tube or an MLT tube, because it helps in, generally when we use electrosurgical equipments with a flexible ET tube or a MLS tube, there is always a chance for damage of this tube. So in such conditions, it would be ideal to use a laser protected endotracheal tube. It's difficult to obtain it. Most of our head and neck surgeons will be having it. So at that moment, I didn't get a laser resistant ET tube, the MLS tube. I had to proceed with a normal microlaryngeal tube. And this is the microlaryngeal tube, and this was the multiple lesions. You can see the lesions were approached with snare debulking, and the lesions was taken out with cryoprobe. So now let's see the video of the procedure. So this was the lesions again involving the central airway, and this was the post-procedure results obtained. So these are the lesions which are involving the central airway, especially the proximal part of the trachea. This videos, the initial part was taken after inserting the rigid bronchoscope. At that time, the MLS tube is not there. So this is the MLS tube or the microlaryngeal tube which I was talking about. Rigid bronchoscope has been taken outside, and the MLS tube has been inserted. And you can see the lesions behind the MLS tube. With the tube in place, I started working around the lesion, and the lesions were debulked with snare electrocautery. So when you use snare electrocautery with a flexible ET tube, you should be extremely careful, because there is always a potential chance for damage of the ET tube. So once the lesions were debulked with standard 2.4 mm flexible cryoprobe, the lesions were retrieved back. So once a major chunk has been taken out, I'm going down and to the carinal region. The next set of lesions was taken out again with a similar approach of snare debulking and followed by retracting the retrieval of the lesion with the help of a cryoprobe. You can see the extent of the bleed during this procedure, because generally rhinosporoidiosis lesions are extremely vascular ones, and this was one of the concerns which the anesthesia team had, because already patient is a bad COPD with a poor lung function, and if during debulking, if it starts to bleed, we'll be inviting danger. So once a tube is there in situ, the advantage of having an MLS tube is that your airway is secured. You can walk around the tube, and once the cuff is inflated, the blood is not going to leak down into either the left or right lung. So see, the bulb is inflated, and I'm walking around the tube so that the blood is not leaking down into the lung parenchyma. The airway is secured, and the procedure is much more safer one. So once the lesion has been debulked, I'm going into the left main bronchus. And once I reach the left main bronchus, I removed the MLS tube. The MLS tube was removed for the reason is that once the tube is there in situ, we get hardly any working space to use these electrosurgical equipments. So once I debulked the tracheal lesions, I removed the MLS tube, inserted back the rigid bronchoscope, and started working around the carinal lesion as well as the left main bronchus lesion. So this is the fiber optic bronchoscopy, which was done post debulking of the tracheal and the left main bronchus rhinosporoidiosis lesion. And compared to the malignant ones, the benign ones gives us a satisfactory results. The mucosa looks like back to normal after debulking. And when we debulk such lesions, we almost get satisfactory results compared to debulking any malignant lesions. So the take-home points of this particular procedure is that this is something alternative compared to rigid bronchoscopy, that is using a microlaryngeal tube. And there are plus points as well as the minus points for this technique. The plus point is that it prevents aspiration of blood into your airway. It provides adequate ventilation throughout the procedure, as well as it increases the confidence level of the bronchoscopist as well as the anesthesia team. But the disadvantage of using this technique is it reduces the working space for the bronchoscopist in a considerable way. Also, when you have to manipulate the upper airway multiple times because there is no rigid conduit, and you have to pass your flexible bronchoscope as well as the electrosurgical equipments multiple times through the vocal cords. So there is a potential chance for damage of the upper airway as well as the cord when you manipulate through this area multiple times. So these are the notable disadvantages of using this technique. And the final point would be that tracheal rhinosporoidiosis is an extremely difficult to treat condition. There is no medical management for this condition. And sadly, this is a recurrent condition, and most of these patients are chronic patients, and they will have to undergo repeated bronchoscopic techniques for removal of these lesions. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Tinku, for a detailed, unusual, highly tropical, complex south-based condition. I think the one person whom I think is the ideal person to comment on this, who has also experience in both the disease and the intervention aspects, is Pattabi. Pattabi, your comments.
Oh, yes. Oh, wonderful job, Tinku. I mean, this is, we have a experience of 5 cases so far, and that would be, I mean, for this disease, it's quite significant. The few things here. The presentation of tracheobronchial rhinosporoidiosis, it seems to have predilection to trachea and main bronchus proximal. There's not much distally, usually. And there are different ways. One is the multiple thing like what Tinku has, and that can be solitary. We had one solitary church bell like a thing which almost occluded a thing and was working like a ball wall also. And the usual thing will be a solitary, and usual thing will be multiple. And usually after a long time, it will develop, roots from different places. So there will be one big polyp. If you think that it's only one base, there can be 2 or 3 bases, and the root can actually get bigger. The more time that they stay there, the more the root gets bigger. It's eminently snareable, and that's what Tinku has shown. It's usually something that can be snared well, especially if it is early. Later, once the tube becomes a little big, you will have a little bit of an elevation, but still you can do a good job while doing a thing. As against it, nasal rhinosporidiosis, the tracheobronchial don't seem to bleed that much. The nasal, you're petrified by bleed because it's a huge amount of bleed that happens there. Strange reasons, it doesn't bleed as much. However, if you don't use a snare, if you try to just pull it off with a cryo or something, the bleeding can be a little disconcerting, especially in this case, when already the patient was having a lot of COPD and severe PAH. I think even a little bit of a bleed is not a good idea. However, we would usually do it even if the rigid is not possible. You can even do it with an LMA. We've done one with a supra and an infra, glottic rhinosporidio in the same thing. We have to use the LMA and remove the small growths just above the vocal cord, and then take a rigid in and take care of the other things. This technique is also good. Only thing is, as he already said, there is a little room for manipulating a snare, and for snare you'll need even without a thing, an LMA will be ideal for snaring because the distal end of scope has to run around, and for that you'll need to have a good amount of a play area. For that, this tube might have a little bit of a disconcerting thing, and that's the reason why I think was taken that. Very fascinating thing, and it might look like it just choked the whole airways, but still the patient can breathe because it kind of moves, so it allows the air to go in. So the patient usually presents till last, they'll wait till they get really sick and then they report you, and that's the reason why it's usually difficult because of the comorbidities also. These are my few points based on thing. We actually wanted to write it because we had 3 cases, and then the 4th one showed up, and so we had to add that and write 4 cases, and the 5th one showed up, and now we just waited for another year and a half. It's only 5, so I think, and especially with Tinku there, because it comes specifically to very south, and so Tinku is there to take care of remaining stuff. So I think I'll have to start writing with the 5.
I have done a couple of cases, and
so I think we should collect and put 8 cases, which is a huge thing.
Tomorrow morning, I'm actually going for the 3rd one. I have one more case posted for the.
Okay, so it's specifically it is seen in southern part of Kerala, southern part of Tamil Nadu, and Sri Lanka. However, the largest series of rhinosporidiosis happened from Raipur. A case of 502 cases of rhinosporidiosis, the nasal stuff, and there is not much of a tracheal stuff from Raipur. With that kind of a series, I don't know why they didn't really get a lot of things. It can happen not only in nose and throat and the airways. It can actually go on to involve the skin, the eyes, the lips, and even in penis. So it's a kind of a vague thing. We don't really know why it presents this way and all that, but it's a fascinating thing for an interventional pulmonologist.
And moreover, when it affects the upper airway, in one of the other cases which I did, there was extensive amount of destruction of the upper airway cartilage, like septal erosion, and all those things were there. Compared to the tracheal involvement, there is when the lesions gets affects the upper airway, there is extensive erosion of the cartilages, and it's like a catastrophic condition for the ENT surgeons.
So interesting. I think a very unusual condition, and considering that none of us are from Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Raipur, or Sri Lanka, I leave it open to the audience. Any one final comment from anybody else besides appreciating them?